She bought a rusted shed for $100, but what she found buried beneath it wasn't just forgotten. It was hidden for a reason. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from, and if stories like this make your heart race, hit that subscribe button and help us grow this community. The road out of the city looked like it hadn't been repaired since before Reina Alvarez was born. Potholes, weeds, and faded yellow lines cut through miles of nowhere until the skyline disappeared completely. Her truck's engine hummed low, tired like her. The last sign she passed read Langston County, population 312. After that, only silence and the faint hum of cicadas. She wasn't looking for miracles, just a roof, 4 walls, and a place to fix things without anyone questioning whether she could. Every shop in the city had made her prove herself twice. Once for being a woman, and again for being black. She was tired of proving. The GPS led her to what used to be a gas station. Boards covered the windows, the pumps were long gone, and behind it sat the shed from the listing. A crooked rectangle of rust and despair. The tin walls leaned like they wanted to collapse, and the roof sagged in the middle under years of rain. A half-bent for sale sign waved in the wind, its paint peeled into oblivion. Reina killed the engine, stepped out, and took in the smell of dry weeds and motor oil. $100, she muttered to herself. Guess you get what you pay for. But even through the decay, she saw it differently. Freedom had a smell. And this was it. Metal, dust, and chance. Inside it was worse. The door stuck, then gave way with a groan that echoed like a ghost sighing. Light streamed through holes in the walls, slicing the air into dusty ribbons. The floor was half-rotted plywood, the air thick with mildew. Someone had left behind a cracked office chair, a rusted fan, and a pile of beer cans from another life. Still, Reina smiled. She'd worked in worse. She dropped her duffel bag on the floor, set her thermos on a wooden beam, and rolled up her sleeves. She'd been living out of her truck for a week, sleeping at rest stops, showering at the gym, chasing job boards that led nowhere. But here, at least, no one was watching. No supervisors calling her sweetheart. No clients doubting her torque wrench skills. No eyes questioning why a black woman had grease under her nails. By day 3, she'd cleared out the trash, patched the leaks with sheet metal, and hauled in her red toolbox, the only thing she owned that felt like home. She worked in silence, radio off, her hands remembering what peace felt like. When she finished for the day, she leaned against the door frame, looking at the place she was turning from ruin into refuge. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to breathe. But on the 4th morning, while sweeping debris into a dented pan, her boot struck something solid, not wood, metal, a hollow clang. She froze. The sound came again when she nudged it with her toe. Kneeling down, she brushed away the grime until she saw the faint outline of a square plate, about 3 feet across, bolted flush into the floor. "What the hell?" she whispered. A welded handle sat in the center, nearly invisible under decades of dust. She pressed it, but it didn't budge. Rust had sealed it shut. She grabbed a crowbar from her kit, wedged it under the edge, and pulled until the bolt screamed in protest. The hatch popped open with a hiss of stale air. Below her yawned a square shaft. A metal ladder disappeared into darkness. Cold air drifted upward, dry and heavy, carrying the smell of stone and something older, something untouched. Reina aimed her flashlight down. Concrete walls, steel rungs, maybe 12 feet deep. Her heartbeat slowed to a heavy thud. No basement had ever been listed in the sale papers. No foundation blueprints showed this. Whatever was down there wasn't supposed to exist. She hesitated only a second before climbing in. The rungs were cold beneath her palms, the air growing 10 degrees cooler with every step. When her boots hit the bottom, she turned slowly, the beam of her flashlight cutting through stillness. The floor was concrete, smooth and deliberate. The tunnel stretched forward, walls lined with conduit and rusted piping. Someone had built this, not a bunker, not a root cellar, but a passage. She walked, careful, her light flickering over faded yellow stripes painted on the floor. Numbers were stenciled on the walls. C3. Load zone, half erased by time. The silence pressed close around her. No insects, no dripping water, nothing alive. 100 feet in, the tunnel split. To the left, a collapsed section blocked by fallen concrete. To the right, a steel door coated in dust. A control box mounted beside it. She brushed her hand across the faded instructions. Access requires primary override key. A thin card slot blinked faintly under her touch, though there shouldn't have been power. She felt the hum beneath her fingers, faint but real. Something was still alive down here. Her stomach tightened. Logic told her to leave, to get out, call someone, sell the shed, and never come back. But logic had never gotten her this far. Curiosity had. She turned toward the open path instead. Climbing over rubble, she ducked through a sagging archway into a small chamber. The beam of her flashlight swept across metal shelves, lockers, and dusty crates. A rusted desk sat in the corner, a rotary phone long dead on its side. On one shelf sat a small steel toolbox with a nameplate welded to the lid. M. Granger. She popped the latches open. Inside, precision tools, lenses, a soldering pen, and sealed plastic sleeves holding old blueprints. Not automotive schematics, something else. Circuits. Machines she didn't recognize. Her pulse quickened. She pulled one sheet out. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. Lines and measurements too clean to be casual. This wasn't junk. This was purpose. Raina looked around the chamber again, her light catching on a faded stencil above the doorframe. Project Ghostline. Her throat went dry. She didn't know what Ghostline was, but one thing was clear. Someone had gone to great lengths to bury it. She folded the blueprint carefully, slid it into her jacket, and started back toward the ladder. When she climbed out, dawn had begun bleeding over the horizon. The shed looked different now, not like a project, but like a cover. A disguise. She stood there in the cool morning air, heart pounding, and whispered to no one. Whatever you are, Ghostline, you picked the wrong mechanic to hide from. Daylight could not quiet the itch under Raina's skin. She spent the morning pretending to work, tightening bolts that didn't need tightening, sweeping the same corner twice, listening for sounds that weren't there. The hatch sat open like an unfinished sentence. At noon she gave up pretending. She slung her flashlight to her belt, tucked a notebook into her jacket, and climbed down. Cold rose to meet her like a held breath. The concrete tunnel received her without a sound, same as yesterday. Smooth walls, conduit like vines frozen mid-climb, the faint yellow centerline running into darkness. She checked her watch out of habit and started walking, counting steps, marking distances on the page. She didn't want to wander this place. She wanted to map it, claim it, make it answer to her. At the split, dust lay thick where the left branch had collapsed, a grave of broken rebar and shattered ceiling, concrete crusted in old mud. Raina knelt, pressed her palm to the rubble. Dry, long dead. She swept her light along the jagged seam. This failure wasn't random. Someone had blasted or weakened the span, then left it to gravity. On the right, the steel door waited just as she'd left it. Shut, dusted, proud. The panel beside it answered her touch with a faint electric tremor, as if somewhere deeper a sleeping machine had turned in its sleep. Access requires primary override key. Primary I don't have, she murmured. Not yet. She turned back to the open path, ducked beneath the bowed arch, and stepped into the chamber. Her light found the shelves again, the lockers with dented doors, the desk slouched in the corner like a tired sentinel. She stood very still and listened. The silence here felt different, dense, as if sound itself had to push through layers to exist. Raina snapped on a second lamp and set it on the desk for spill. Dust leapt in the beam. She pulled open locker doors one by one, empty hangers, a moth-chewed jacket with a faded patch, a coil of wire, a bundle of cloth that turned out to be a bag for tools long gone. She took her time. Most garages taught you speed. This place taught you patience. Crates lined the bottom shelf, a gray row stamped with a gear encircling an eagle. The logo didn't ring a bell, but the language did. Procurement numbers, lot codes, vague labels like sensors, field, and electrical, non-lethal. Government speak for don't ask, don't touch. She levered one open with a flathead screwdriver. Inside, spools of cloth-wrapped wire, ceramic insulators, a metal instrument that looked suspiciously like a Geiger counter, the kind of thing Raina had only ever seen in documentaries narrated by men with solemn voices. The battery bay was corroded to rot. She set it down gently, half relieved it couldn't wake. On the desk, a rotary phone lay off its cradle, cord stiff with dust. Beside it, a tin of dried-out grease pencils and a stack of manila folders fused together by time. Raina slid a putty knife into the stack's edge and teased one folder free. Blank. Another. Blank. The third cracked open like brittle pastry and gave her a glimpse of schematic lines that collapsed into powder when she tried to lift the page. "Okay," she breathed, adjusting her approach. Light hands. She moved back to the small steel toolbox with the welded nameplate. M. Granger. Yesterday she'd only peeked. Today she settled onto the chair, braced her elbows, and opened the lid with ceremony. Precision tools, lenses in velvet pouches, a temperature pen, a tiny hand press like a jeweler's. The plastic sleeves held circuit diagrams hand-lettered and exact, the kind of care that said the person who drew them respected whoever would have to read them later. She traced a line with her finger, following the flow of a signal through symbols she halfway knew and halfway wanted to claim. A drawer in the desk resisted until she coaxed it with oil from a tiny vial in Granger's kit. It groaned and gave, releasing a smell like old paper in colder rooms. Inside lay a leather notebook the color of black coffee and twice as stubborn, edges chafed soft by handling. No title on the front, just a name impressed in faded gold. Michael Granger. Raina set both palms on the cover and let herself feel its weight. Tools held memory, so did books. She opened to the first page, the spine crackled. Initiated, June 1st, 1968. Tunnel, Phase 2 complete. Chamber integrity, stable. Primary vault sealed pending funding. Prototype schedule, Q3. God help us if the math is right. Her breath came shallow. She turned a page, then another. Neat handwriting marched in calm lines. Measurements, test conditions, phrases that skated past jargon into fear. Field variance increasing. Dampener oscillation within parameters. Security demands termination of non-classified documentation. In the margin, as if he'd looked up from writing and glimpsed something that changed the temperature of his blood. A single line. If discovered, deny existence. Tunnel must remain ghosted. Ghosted. She remembered the faded stencil above the chamber door. Project, Ghost Line. The word settled into place like a key finding its slot. She read until her eyes pricked. There were diagrams sketched in pencil over coffee stains. 2 pages covered in tight equations she knew better than to pretend she understood. Then domestic debris. Supply lists. A diner receipt paperclip to notes on coil quench and thermal isolation. A scribble near the bottom of a page caught her. Lunch W/E says tests clean. No surname, no rank, just a letter. The next entry was shorter, the handwriting slanted harder right. Funding frozen on final phase. Security wants prints destroyed. I made a copy. Below it, a small rectangle was outlined in pencil, a tube, a canister, and annotated with measurements. Raina closed the notebook, ran her thumb along the cover's scar. "You hid it," she said to the room. "Where?" She stood and scanned upward. Garages taught you to look where debris fell. Secret places taught you to look where it never would. She climbed the shelving unit carefully, testing each bracket before trusting her weight to it, until her head brushed the gritty underside of the concrete beam. She slid her hand along the seam where the shelf met the wall and felt metal, cooler than the dust, stubborn. She wedged her fingers and pulled. A slim metal tube came free with a dry whisper, and a small storm of dust filled her mouth and eyes. She coughed, climbed down, and cradled the tube like a baton passed at the last second of a race. The cap resisted. She tapped it against the desk, then used the jeweler's press from Granger's kit to nudge the threads. It gave. Inside lay a roll of architectural paper, yellowed but intact. The outer edge crackled with age. She set 2 wrenches as paperweights and uncurled it with the care of a surgeon revealing a heart. The drawing wasn't a single plan. It was a system. Elevations of the tunnel network, wiring runs, notations in that same careful hand. At the center of the page, a circular space labeled Core Assembly Chamber, radiated lines to nodes marked MKV, interface unit, dampeners, field coils, and primary vault, the exact place behind the sealed door. Reyna laughed once, too loud in the tight room. She clapped a hand over her mouth, startled by the sound. The map didn't tell her what Ghostline was, but it told her how Ghostline lived. She photographed each sheet with her phone, lining up the edges, making sure the light didn't blow out the pencil. She copied down the labels in her notebook, then re-rolled the plans and slid them back into the tube. Not because she wanted to rebury them. The opposite. She wanted to keep the ritual intact. It felt right to return the baton to the runner for one more second before you sprint. Next, she moved to the conduit along the wall near the door, running her knuckles over the metal until a faint vibration thrummed under skin and bone. Power, a trickle but steady. She tracked the line to a junction box the size of a bread tin and levered it open. Inside, a maintenance miracle. An old battery backup, its casing bruised but its indicator light, by some grace, still a spiteful red. The unit was a breed of tough they didn't make anymore. Reyna wiped the dust with the edge of her sleeve and whistled. You stubborn machine. She pulled Granger's kit closer and made a small altar. Voltage meter, screwdriver, soldering pen. The battery wouldn't take a full resurrection, but perhaps it didn't need to. Perhaps it only needed a nudge. She rerouted a pair of corroded leads, borrowed one cable from a crate where time had already broken the seal, and kissed the teeth of the breaker with the flat of her screwdriver. The indicator light flickered, thought about it, and then glowed steady. Come on, she urged, not sure whether she meant the battery, the door, or herself. She rerouted the line back to the control panel and crossed the chamber, heart tapping at her ribs. The panel woke like a slow eye. The display soldiered to life in bruised green letters. System recognition, standby, primary override required. She blew out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Alive was different than open, but alive mattered. She set her lamp to a lower angle and returned to the notebook. The next pages shifted tone. Less lab, more confession. We are not building a weapon, they will call it that. They always do when they don't understand a thing. This is not destructive, this is dampening. If field drift continues, systems will begin to fail within our lifetimes. Navigation first, then grids. The world will call it coincidence until it can't. A pause, a blot as if the pen had lingered too long. E says I am writing for someone I'll never meet. If so, then you will need the override. If I fail, she will hold it. She believes more than I do. Reyna's scalp prickled like a storm was threading itself together above ground. She touched the word she will hold it and imagined small hands stubborn around a thing the world had told them to drop. She closed the notebook gently and slid it into her bag. The urge to run to the sealed door returned like a tide. She fought it down. Work the sequence, Alvarez. Don't chase the cliff. Build the stairs. She walked the chamber again, slower, cataloging details she'd missed. A calendar thumbtacked to the wall, stopped in October 1971. A coffee mug ring branded into the wood. On a shelf, a tin badge without a pin, an eagle melted into a gear the same as the crates. Under the desk, an empty steel case with foam cutouts that matched a card the size of a deck of playing cards. Override, her mind supplied, with a clarity that left her mouth dry. She sat on the stool and let the room's temperature settle. When you worked on engines long enough, you learned to trust the pause. Heat bled. Metals equalized. The truth of a system announced itself when you weren't talking over it. Finally, she stood, swept her gear into her bag, and killed the lamps. The dark came quickly and completely, a velvet so thorough it felt like weight. She climbed the ladder by memory and hauled the hatch shut. The shed took her in with the soft slap of its thin air and a chorus of cicadas that sounded impossibly loud after so much stone. Outside, the sky had gone the color of coins. Evening would come fast. Raina locked the shed, climbed into the truck, and sat with her hands pressed flat against the steering wheel. The leather notebook warmed her thigh through denim. She traced the evening's plan in the windshield's reflection like a mechanic's prayer. Scan the notes again. Cross-reference the tube's measurements with the shelves for any second hiding place. Check public records for Granger. Obits, patents, procurement. And find E. Back at a diner 15 minutes down the road, she took a corner booth, ordered coffee strong enough to argue, and spread her notes between the salt shaker and the napkin holder. The waitress gave her the same polite distance people offered a stranger they wanted not to judge too quickly. Raina returned the kindness with a smile and the exact change. She searched government contractor databases on her phone until her battery slumped to red. Granger, Michael returned too many ghosts. Ghostline returned nothing. She switched lanes. Langston County, tunnel permits, decommissioned civil defense sites, Bell Labs, field research personnel, 1960s. The screen kept offering the past in clipped, unsentimental lines. On her third cup, she found a link in a scanned trade periodical. M. Granger credited as co-author on a paper about field harmonics and dampening arrays, published in 1969, with a companion author, E. Granger. Not a colleague. A spouse? She clicked through and found a retirement announcement from a local newspaper archive, a grainy photo of a woman with a long silver braid and eyes like rain. Evelyn Granger, electrical engineer, moving into a senior community 2 towns over. Raina sat back, heartbeat kicking hard enough to make the coffee surface shiver. She touched the notebook in her jacket and imagined a promise folded into it like a letter never mailed. She will hold it. She paid, tipped well, and stepped into the dark. The night smelled like hot tar surrendering to cool air. Her truck's engine turned once, then twice, then caught with a faithful rasp. She drove out of the parking lot with her window cracked and the radio off. The road into Langston County taught you how to leave quietly. She let it. Back at the shed, she parked close, then angled the truck so its headlights poured through the gap under the door. She didn't go back down. Not tonight. The tunnel could keep its silence. She'd keep hers too. She climbed into the bed of the truck, spread a blanket, and leaned against the toolbox that had followed her from place to place like a loyal dog. Above the roofline, the sky wore 1,000 indifferent stars. Below the floorboards, a sleeping system breathed in its own metal way. Raina held the notebook against her chest and practiced the discipline that had saved her more than any wrench size or socket depth. She let the fear have its say, and then she let it go. In the morning, she'd drive to the address on the notice and knock. She'd ask a stranger for a key to a door that time had tried to keep closed. She would be told yes or no or not yet. But tonight she whispered into the chill, "I hear you, Ghostline," and heard the rusted tin answer in the smallest tremor. When dawn began to pencil the horizon, Raina slept for the first time in days, briefly, lightly, like someone who had set a clock inside her bones and knew exactly when it would ring. Morning came gray and restless, the kind of sky that promised rain but couldn't commit. Raina didn't care. She had a name now, Evelyn Granger, and that was enough to keep her moving. The notebook rode in the passenger seat beside her, open to the page where Michael had written, "If I fail, she will hold it." Every time she glanced at those words, her pulse quickened. The drive to the retirement complex took nearly an hour. Highway, then 2-lane blacktop. Then the quiet order of manicured lawns and trimmed hedges. The sign out front read Oakview Haven, the kind of place built for gentle endings. Raina parked between 2 Buicks and sat still for a moment, staring at her reflection in the windshield. Oil-stained hands, dark skin, tired eyes. She looked wildly out of place among all the pastel cardigans and bird baths. But she wasn't turning back now. Inside, the air smelled of lemon polish and soft decay. A woman at the front desk looked up from a crossword puzzle. "Can I help you?" "Yes, ma'am," Raina said, keeping her voice even. "I'm looking for a resident, Evelyn Granger. I'm her niece." The woman smiled, too polite to question the lie. Down the West Wing, Unit 8C. She likes visitors. The hallway stretched long and quiet, carpet muffling her boots. She stopped at a door with a paper wreath taped to it. The name E. Granger, written in looping cursive. Raina knocked gently. It took a while for the latch to turn. The door opened to reveal a small, thin woman with silver hair braided down her back and eyes sharp enough to see through stone. "Evelyn Granger?" The old woman nodded once. "You must be here about Michael." Raina froze. Evelyn opened the door wider. "Come in, before you make the nurses suspicious." The apartment was small but filled with life. Plants, books, framed photos of mountains and circuits. A half-assembled radio on the kitchen table. Raina stood in the middle, unsure where to put her hands. "I found his notes," she said finally, "in a shed. There's a tunnel underneath it." "I know." Evelyn's voice was calm, matter-of-fact. "He built it because no one else would listen." Raina sat down slowly. "What was he building?" Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she reached into a drawer beside her chair. From it, she pulled a plastic sleeve containing a small magnetic keycard, worn and yellowed with age. Override was stamped across it in red block letters. "He made me promise never to go back," Evelyn said, setting it on the table between them. "Said it would only bring trouble. But I knew one day someone would find it. Someone who'd see it for what it was." Raina stared at the card. What was it? Evelyn's eyes clouded, the way old glass does when it remembers too much. "It wasn't a weapon. Michael didn't build those. He was trying to save balance, the planet's, not ours. He said the world's magnetic field was decaying faster than anyone admitted, that if it drifted too far, systems would fail. Navigation, power, communication. He called it the stabilizer. Said it could correct the field before it was too late." Raina felt her breath catch. "And the government shut it down?" "They didn't understand it. They were afraid of what they couldn't control. So they buried it, and him along with it." For a long time neither spoke. The hum of a refrigerator filled the silence. Evelyn slid the card closer. He wanted to finish it, but they took everything. The funding, the access, the friends who might have helped. I thought it would die with me. Then you came. Raina touched the card. It was warm from Evelyn's hands, but it felt heavier than metal, like it carried the gravity of every choice that had led to this table. "Why me?" she asked softly. Evelyn smiled, faint but knowing. "Because you're a builder." He was one too. It takes a certain kind to keep faith in broken things. Rain began to fall outside, light at first, then steady. Raina slipped the card into her jacket pocket, her pulse hammering in her ears. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do." "Finish it," Evelyn said simply, "and be careful who sees you doing it." When Raina left, the sky had turned the color of old iron. She stood by her truck, staring at the rain striking the pavement in silver threads. Behind her, the door to Unit 8C closed quietly, the sound final but gentle. On the drive back, every mile felt heavier. The card in her pocket seemed to hum faintly, almost in rhythm with her heartbeat. She tried to convince herself it was her imagination. But when she reached the shed and lifted the hatch, that same hum greeted her from below. The ladder rattled as she descended, flashlight cutting through the darkness. The tunnel looked different this time, awake. The air vibrated faintly, charged like the air before a storm. She walked straight to the steel door and brushed dust from the control panel. Her hand shook slightly as she slid the override card into the slot. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a mechanical sigh echoed down the tunnel, followed by a low sequence of clicks. Red light blinked to amber, then green. The steel door shuddered once, then parted down the middle with a hiss of stale air. Raina stepped forward, flashlight trembling in her hand. Beyond the threshold lay a circular chamber, perfectly preserved. Metal walls smooth as mirrors, cables coiled like veins, faint blue lights pulsing with life. In the center stood a machine unlike anything she'd ever seen, a cylinder of copper and steel, humming with restrained energy. Reyna whispered to no one. "What did you build, Michael?" The console beside it flickered awake as she approached. System recognition. Manual override confirmed. Stabilizer core. Standby. Calibration required. Her reflection stared back at her in the polished metal. For the first time in years, she felt small, but not weak. She pulled out her notebook and began to write. If the world had buried this, she was going to bring it back to life. The chamber's air felt filtered, almost sweet after the dust of the tunnel, as if time itself had been scrubbed out of it. Copper coils rose like ribs around the central cylinder. Braided cables ran from the floor into the machine's belly and out again into the walls. Reyna moved with the careful economy of someone who knew one wrong tug could wake a sleeping giant on the wrong foot. She set her notebook on the console ledge, opened Michael's leather journal beside it, and matched the handwriting to the hardware. MKV, Interface Unit. The panel in front of her wore the same label etched in faded enamel, dampeners. There, a ring of adjustable housings around the core, most so out of tolerance that her mechanic's thumb could feel the wobble. Field coils. Their lacquer had darkened to old honey, but the windings looked whole. She took notes the way she usually took engines apart. In sequence, no skipped steps, no heroics. First pass, assessment. Second, cleaning the contacts, reseating the connectors, replacing anything that crumbled under the gentlest twist. She replaced gaskets made brittle as biscuits. She trimmed and re-terminated wire ends with the jeweler's press from Granger's kit. When she powered the console from the stubborn backup in the junction box, the screen came alive a shade brighter than yesterday. System recognition subsystems, partial calibration required. "Yeah, I heard you," she murmured, more to herself than the machine. Hours passed unnoticed, measured only by the cooling and heating of metal under her palms and the tiny, satisfied clicks of contacts seating home. When she finally climbed the ladder for air, the afternoon had collapsed into a sky the color of a bruise. She locked the hatch and stood with her hands on her hips to let her eyes widen after so much glossed metal. That was when she saw the SUV. Black, idling half a block down. Too far to be neighborly, too close to be coincidence. The tint on the windows was a shade past legal. It rolled away when she looked straight at it, as if polite enough to honor the ritual of pretending she hadn't noticed. Back inside, she told herself she was imagining it. She told herself a lot of things. That the mailbox hadn't been opened and shut without leaving mail. That no one had touched her dumpster. Then, taking her trash out after dark, she saw the pages on the gravel, torn from a notebook, footprints ground into their margins. Her stomach dropped before her brain said Michael's. She crouched and turned one over. Not Michael's, hers. A copy she'd made of his schematic labels, pages she'd tossed after rewriting them clean. The wind hadn't arranged them. Someone's hand had. She stood very still under her porch bulb, pulse ticking at her throat. "Okay," she said to the dark. "I see you seeing me." She didn't sleep. She stashed the override card and the most sensitive diagrams beneath a false plank in her truck bed, then returned to the tunnel and locked the hatch from the inside. Down there the fear spread out thinner. The hum of the core steadied her hands. By dawn the next day, she admitted what the night had made obvious. She needed another pair of steady hands and a second set of eyes. She called Jaime. He answered on the second ring. "Tell me where and whether I need to bring a breaker bar or bail money." "Neither," she said. "Just come." He arrived with coffee and silence, the two finest gifts a friend could bring before seeing something that would rewrite the way you understood buildings. When she lifted the hatch, he let out a single low whistle. The tunnel took him like it took her, without ceremony, without apology. He touched the concrete wall, then the conduit, then the yellow stripe under his boot with a reverence that would have embarrassed him if there had been anyone else to see. "Okay," he said at last, voice low. "You weren't kidding." She walked him through everything. The chamber, the notebook, the plans in the tube, the piece of history sealed behind the steel door, the SUV, the papers in the gravel. He listened without interrupting, then nodded once. "Tell me where you want me." "Stabilizer housing," she said, pointing to the adjustable ring of dampeners. "Half of these are out of spec, and the mounts are singing under load." "I'll quiet the choir." They fell into the choreography that had always made sense between them. Jaime checked tolerances, shimmed where metal had drifted, and backed off where age had made threads fragile. Reyna took the interface panel apart, bench-cleaned contacts until the copper shone clean as a coin's edge, then reassembled the board with that peculiar, satisfying click of going home. When they powered the console this time, new lines appeared beneath the old. Subsystems, online field sensors, streaming interface, ready calibration required. The screen blinked, then redrew itself into a crude 3D model that made both of them lean in without meaning to. A globe rotated, not pretty, but precise, gridded with lines that flickered and flowed. Vectors arced from pole to pole like harp strings under stress. Colors washed and recalibrated, blues to greens to yellows at the edges. A warning pulsed in the corner. Polar variance exceeding threshold. Activation advised. Jamie exhaled a syllable that wasn't a word. "That's the Earth." "That's the field," Reyna said softly. Michael wasn't kidding. She flipped to the final pages of the leather notebook and found entries she hadn't absorbed before. The ink a little darker, the tilt of the handwriting sharper, as if the writer had been walking while writing. If magnetic decay continues at the projected rate, stabilization will be necessary within 75 years. Prototype is not a weapon, it is a correction. Without dampening, drift beyond safe bounds, then cascade. Navigation error first, then grid failure. If you are reading this, the variance has exceeded the model. She read it aloud, then let the page close under her palm. Jaime rubbed the back of his neck, staring at the globe. "And this thing?" "What? Talks to the field?" "It pushes back," she said. "Balances. Like a brake press just enough on a downhill grade." They worked until their hands cramped and the small muscles along their forearms buzzed. Reyna followed the calibration checklist Granger had left like a breadcrumb trail through math. Zero the coils. Seat the dampeners. Set base gain to 0.8. 2 comma creep to 0.02. Don't rush the thermal cycle. The last note was underlined twice. She listened to it. Between steps, the tunnel reminded them someone else was listening too. A dull metallic thud echoed once from the ladder above, clean and singular. Jamie froze mid-turn. Reyna did too. Neither spoke. No voice followed, no second footfall, no breath. After a long minute, the silence stitched itself closed again. Jaime raised his brows. She shook her head. Not now. He returned to his torque wrench. She returned to the console. Late afternoon, the reading settled into something like harmony. The warning in the corner still pulsed, exceeding threshold, but the rest of the panel looked ready. The calibration bar crawled to the end of its track and went steady green. The console chimed once, not loud, but undeniable. Calibration complete. Primary sequence, stand by. Initiate stabilization, sequence, yen. Neither of them breathed for a few seconds. Reyna felt the weight of the keycard in her pocket like a coin heated in a closed fist. She imagined Evelyn's hands passing it across the table, imagined Michael's pen slowing at the end of a line when he wrote, "If I fail, she will hold it." Before we even think about pressing that, Jaime said, steady in the way only a person trying to be steady could be, we lock down everything we can lock down. Backups, redundancy. If this goes sideways, we don't want it calling home to anyone we don't trust. He was right. She killed the console's dormant wireless, pulling the stubby antenna and stashing it with the other parts slated for the above-ground world. She mirrored the system state to a portable drive, and then to another, labeling both with pencil instead of trusting an electronic tag. Jaime checked the mechanicals one last time, laying the back of his hand against housings to feel heat instead of trusting numbers alone. When they finally stepped away, the machine looked not new, Nothing old and true ever did. But right. The way a rebuilt engine looks the first time it runs without a rattle that tells you a story you don't want to hear. Raina leaned her hips against the console and let the moment settle on her shoulders. Up there, a black SUV pretended to be nothing, and a mailbox opened and shut itself. Down here, a machine older than she was asked a question in language that felt like destiny pretending to be code. "What if we're wrong?" Shamie asked, not quite looking at her. She smiled without much humor. "Then we do what we've always done. We take responsibility for the bolts we turned." He nodded once, as if he'd only needed to hear someone say it. The screen still waited, cursor pulsing at YN, patient as a held breath. "Tomorrow," Raina said, surprising herself with the word. "We go up, we sleep, we come back clear. We give it the kind of first start you'd give an engine you love. No midnight mistakes." They powered down to standby with the sequence Granger had insisted on. Slow, respectful. The hum eased to a lower register, not silence, but the kind of quiet that trusted you to return. On the way out, they reset the hatch, then kicked gravel back over their boot prints like kids who still believed in tricks. Outside, dusk had pooled in the weeds. The same SUV had returned to its mark. This time, it didn't leave when they looked at it. Shamie stepped half a pace forward, squaring his shoulders in a way Raina had seen him do exactly 3 times in their friendship, and never for nothing. The driver's side window lowered 2 inches, just enough to be a face or a camera or a pistol, just enough to say we measured you. Raina raised her phone not to film but to frame and memorize. The window went up again. The SUV idled, then rolled away, tail lights floating red and then vanishing. They stood there until the night took the color out of everything. When Jaime left, he didn't say be careful or call me because both were too small. He just tapped the truck bed where the false plank concealed what mattered and said, "I'll be back before you're down there." "Bring coffee," she said. Black as a secret. When the lot was empty again, Raina sat in the shed's doorway with the leather notebook in her lap. She turned to the last page. No words, just an unfinished checklist. The final box blank. The line above it read, "Stabilization sequence. Operator discretion." In the margin, a note in smaller writing, almost an afterthought. "No one will thank you. That's how you'll know it worked." She closed the book and set her timer for 3 hours of sleep. When it rang, she would wake Jaime. They would go below, and the cursor would still be there, pulsing like a heart on the wrong side of a rib cage, asking the smallest and biggest question a pair of mechanics had ever been asked. "Initiate stabilization sequence." The night held its breath with them. The tunnel felt different when they returned before dawn, charged, alive, as though the air itself had been waiting. Raina led, flashlight steady in her hand, Jaime close behind carrying 2 mugs of coffee that steamed ghost into the cold. The hum from the core reached them halfway down the ladder. Faint but rhythmic, like a pulse under stone. Neither spoke. They knew what waited. The console blinking impatient green, the question still hanging in the dark. "Initiate stabilization sequence." Raina set the coffee down on the console's edge and wiped her palms on her jeans. Jaime leaned beside her, arms folded, his face drawn but calm. "Once we start," he said, "there's no undo." "There never is," she answered. "Not with the big things." She reached for the keyboard. The metal was cool, grounded. She thought of Evelyn's trembling hands, of Michael bent over blueprints no one would ever fund, of all the silent years that had waited for this moment. Then she pressed Y. The reaction wasn't explosive. It was precise. The core exhaled a low, resonant tone that seemed to pass through everything. The floor, the air, their bones. Light spiraled along the copper coils in rippling motion, blue giving way to white, then to a steady gold that pulsed in rhythm with the sound. The console scrolled lines of code faster than the eye could follow. Numbers climbed, steadied, recalibrated. A schematic of the Earth appeared again, fields of color twisting, then settling into symmetry. Variance stabilized, primary sequence complete, system standby. Silence returned, thick and holy. Jaime was the first to move, whispering, "Did we just—" Reyna nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think we did." For a moment, neither knew whether to cheer or pray. The air smelled faintly of ozone and dust burned clean. The hum had deepened into something soft, endless, like the world itself sighing in relief. They ran diagnostics for hours, documenting everything. Temperatures dropped to normal, power draw leveled out. No alerts, no errors. The stabilizer simply worked, quietly, perfectly. When they finally climbed back up, the morning sun had just crested the hills. The world looked ordinary. Birds, wind, the smell of damp earth. But Reyna felt it differently. The weight she'd carried since finding that hatch had lifted, replaced by a calm she couldn't name. Back above ground, they loaded their evidence into sealed drives, encrypted, hidden where only they could find them. Jaime sealed the hatch with new bolts, leaving no trace it had ever opened. Later that day, Reyna drove back to Oakview Haven. Evelyn waited in her chair by the window, a teacup trembling slightly in her hands. "You finished it," she said before Reyna even spoke. Reyna nodded. "It's stable now. Balanced." Evelyn smiled, tears brightening her tired eyes. "He always said the world would never notice. Only when it failed would anyone have known what it had lost." Reyna handed her the override key. "It belongs with you." "No," Evelyn whispered, closing Reyna's fingers around it. "It belongs with the one who believed enough to try again." That night, back at the shed, Reyna welded a new sign above the door. Core Mechanics. Just a small garage again. No secrets, no symbols, just her and the work. She patched the last holes in the roof, swept the floor, and started taking calls for engine repairs. People noticed something different about her. The way she spoke slower, listened deeper, smiled more like she knew something the rest of them didn't. Teenagers from town came by asking for apprenticeships, and she taught them not just how to fix cars, but how to listen, really listen to what machines were trying to say. Sometimes, after closing, she opened the hatch and climbed down to sit beside the stabilizer. It still hummed, faint and steady, a note below hearing, but felt all the same. She would rest her hand on the warm metal and whisper, "Still holding." The hum would answer softly, like a heartbeat beneath the earth. Reyna Alvarez had come looking for a place to work with her hands, and found the pulse of the planet instead. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't need to. The balance held, the field sank quietly underfoot, and the world kept spinning, blissfully unaware that a rusted shed and a black mechanic had kept its heart from slipping out of tune. She didn't just fix engines. She kept the world in balance. Some secrets are better left unsaid, but stories like this deserve to be remembered. If this one moved you, leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe for more untold stories that hide beneath the surface.